Rain traced slow lines down the glass walls of the penthouse, turning the city below into a blur of trembling lights. Ethan stood alone near the window, jacket still on, tie loosened, his phone dark in his hand. Somewhere behind him, laughter echoed softly from the dining room. His wife Lily, her father Richard, glasses clinking in celebration. Ethan didn't join them, because tonight Richard Hale had just offered him something that could change everything. And the man had no idea he was speaking to the person who already owned nearly half of his empire. Before the story pulls you any further, I'm curious, where are you listening from right now? A quiet bedroom, a crowded bus, a late-night shift somewhere? Drop your city or country in the comments. It still amazes me how one human story can travel farther than we ever do. Ethan first met Lily Hale on a Tuesday afternoon that smelled like chalk dust and cheap coffee. She was volunteering at a community literacy center, hair pulled back, sleeves rolled up, laughing softly as she helped a shy boy sound out his name. Ethan had come to donate old laptops from a startup he'd quietly sold months earlier. He noticed her kindness before he noticed her beauty, and that, he would later realize, was everything. They talked about books, about how success felt emptier than people admitted, about how Lily wanted a life that wasn't measured in numbers. She never mentioned her father. Ethan never mentioned his past. Their love grew in small, ordinary ways. Grocery runs, late-night noodles, shared silences that felt safe. When Lily finally told him who her father was, Richard Hale, the steel-eyed Zoe whose name crowned skyscrapers, Ethan only smiled and said, "He must be proud of you." What he didn't say was that he knew Richard's balance sheets better than Richard himself. Years earlier, Ethan had been the silent architect behind a daring turnaround, an off-the-books rescue of one of Hale Group's failing divisions. Through shell investments and quiet leverage, Ethan had acquired 47% ownership. No headlines, no applause, just control. He walked away richer than anyone guessed, choosing anonymity over power. When Richard met Ethan for the first time, he saw only a polite, intelligent schoolteacher with worn shoes and thoughtful eyes. "You married up," Richard once joked at dinner. Ethan laughed with everyone else. Marriage softened Ethan in ways money never could. Lily's warmth, her belief in honesty, made the secret heavier with each passing year. But how do you tell your wife that her husband owns nearly half of her father's $1.4 billion company? How do you explain silence that long without sounding like a lie? Then came the diagnosis. Richard collapsed during a board meeting. The hospital room smelled of antiseptic and fear. Lily held her father's hand as machines hummed around him, her composure cracking only when she thought no one was watching. Ethan stood behind her, steady, absorbing every tremor. Recovery changed Richard, slowed him, made him reflective and cautious. He began looking for someone he could trust, someone outside the bloodline. That's how Ethan found himself invited to dinner tonight. The table gleamed. Wine aged longer than Ethan's career sat uncorked. Richard spoke with unusual humility, his voice lower than the Titan Lily had grown up with. "I'm stepping back," Richard said, eyes fixed on Ethan. "The company needs someone sharp, someone with values. I want you to consider taking an executive role. Maybe more." Ethan felt the room tilt. If you were standing in Ethan's place right then, holding a secret that big, what would you do? Would you speak up immediately, or protect the peace a little longer? Be honest in the comments. And if this moment stirred something in you, just tap like. Sometimes that's enough to say, "I felt this." Richard leaned closer, sincere. "I'd even be willing to offer equity. A significant stake." Lily's eyes lit up with pride. She squeezed Ethan's hand under the table, unaware she was gripping the palm of a man who already owned 47%. Ethan forced a smile, heart pounding, as thunder rolled somewhere beyond the glass. The secret was no longer just his. It was ticking louder with every breath, as Richard waited for an answer that could shatter a family or finally set it free. And Ethan realized, with quiet dread, that the hardest part wasn't what he owned, but what the truth might cost. Ethan didn't answer right away. The cutlery lay untouched, the wine untouched too. Richard's question hovered in the air like smoke that refused to clear. Lily noticed his hesitation and tilted her head, her smile soft, encouraging. That look, trust without suspicion, cut deeper than any accusation ever could. Take your time, Richard said, waving a hand as if the offer were casual. These things don't need rushed answers. But Ethan knew this moment had been years in the making. Later that night, when the city finally quieted and the rain softened into a whisper, Lily curled beside him on the couch. The lamp cast a warm circle of light, catching the worry he hadn't hidden well enough. "You were quiet tonight," she said gently. "Dad's offer surprised you, didn't it?" Ethan nodded. "It did." She smiled, resting her head on his shoulder. "He respects you. That doesn't come easy for him." Ethan swallowed. He almost spoke then. Almost let the truth spill out into the safety of her warmth. But the words tangled with fear. Fear of breaking the life they'd built on honesty everywhere except the one place that mattered most. "I just want to do what's right," he said instead. Lily squeezed his hand. "You always do." That night, Ethan barely slept. His mind replayed old memories. The early years when he was nobody, when his mother worked 2 jobs and still apologized for not being home enough. He remembered sitting beside her hospital bed, promising himself that power would never change him, that money would never own him. The next morning, Lily left early to visit her father. Ethan followed later, stopping first at a small bakery near the hospital. He bought Richard's favorite bread, the kind he'd once mentioned in passing from his childhood. It was a small thing, almost insignificant, but when Ethan handed it to Richard in the hospital room, the older man's eyes softened. "You remembered," Richard said quietly. Ethan shrugged. "Seemed important." That moment, simple, human, shifted something. Richard began to talk, not as a CO, but as a father, a man facing his own limits. He spoke about regrets, about being too hard on Lily, about fearing that everything he built might crumble once he stepped away. Ethan listened, truly listened. If you had seen that quiet kindness, the way Ethan showed up without expectations, what would you have done in his place? Would you have stayed silent, just to protect a fragile peace? Share your thoughts below. And if this moment moved you, tap like, because sometimes empathy deserves a voice. Days passed. Meetings were scheduled. Lawyers called. Richard began looping Ethan into strategic conversations, trusting his instincts without knowing their shared history ran far deeper than he imagined. At home, Lily glowed with excitement. "Can you believe this?" she said one evening while cooking pasta. "Dad finally sees you the way I always have." Ethan watched her stir the sauce, unaware she was orbiting a truth that could upend everything. Guilt pressed against his ribs, heavy and constant. The truth waited like a locked door Ethan passed every day, pretending not to see the handle. Morning routines continued, coffee brewed, shoes tied, quick kisses at the door, but everything felt thinner, stretched over a quiet fracture. Richard's condition improved enough for him to return home. With that came urgency. Board members pushed timelines. Advisors circled like polite vultures. Ethan's phone buzzed constantly, numbers and projections flashing across the screen like reminders of a life he'd buried. One evening, Lily found him sitting on the bedroom floor, papers spread around him. She leaned against the doorframe, arms folded loosely. "You okay?" she asked. Ethan looked up, startled. "Yeah, just work stuff." She stepped closer, picked up one sheet, frowned. "These numbers, are these Dad's?" He hesitated half a second too long. "They're related." Lily studied his face, not accusing, just searching. "You don't have to carry everything alone, you know." That was the moment. The door creaked open in his mind. He could have said it then. But fear, subtle and convincing, whispered that the timing was wrong. That love, once shaken, never fully settles again. "I know," he said softly. "I promise I'll tell you when it matters." She nodded, trusting him again. And that trust burned. The next day, Ethan accompanied Richard to a charity event downtown. Cameras flashed. Donors smiled. Ethan stayed a step behind, comfortable in the shadows. At one point, a young intern tripped, spilling drinks across the marble floor. Before security could react, Ethan knelt, helped her up, handed her napkins, whispered, Happens to everyone. The girl smiled through embarrassment. Thank you. Richard watched the exchange closely. Later, in the car, Richard said quietly, "You notice people. That's rare." Ethan said nothing. "Now it's your turn." Pause for a second. Think about one small good thing you did recently, even if no one noticed. Write it in the comments so others remember kindness still exists. Your moment might be exactly what someone scrolling tonight needs. That night, Richard called unexpectedly and asked Ethan to come by alone. The house was dim, staff dismissed early. They sat across from each other in the study, the weight of unfinished conversations pressing in. "I'm dying," Richard said bluntly. Ethan stiffened. "The doctors." "Not tomorrow. Not next month," Richard interrupted. "But sooner than I'd like. And I don't want to leave chaos behind." He slid another folder across the desk. "This one thinner. Personal. I had the lawyers draft this," Richard continued. "If you accept, you'll take over operations gradually. Full control in a year." Ethan's breath caught, not at the offer but at the trust. "There's something you should know," Ethan said slowly. Richard raised an eyebrow. "Yes." Ethan's heart hammered. This was it. The edge of everything. But before he could speak, Richard leaned back and smiled tiredly. "Before you say anything, know this. I don't care about your pedigree. I care about your character." The words landed heavy. The door slammed shut again. Ethan left without signing. At home, Lily waited up, curled on the couch with a blanket. She searched his face the moment he entered. "Bad meeting?" she asked. "No," he said. "Important." She patted the seat beside her. He sat. Silence stretched. "Ethan," she said finally, voice quiet, "if there's something you're afraid to tell me, I'd rather hear it imperfectly than never." His chest tightened. He reached for her hand, fingers trembling. "I love you," he said. She smiled softly. "I know." But love wasn't the problem. Fear was. Days later, the inevitable happened. A financial journalist published a retrospective on Hale Group's past rescues. Buried halfway down the article was a line about a silent investor who once held near-controlling interest during a crisis, anonymous, but influential. Ethan read it twice. Then 3 times. The past was knocking. Richard called him that evening, voice sharp. "Have you seen this?" "Yes," Ethan said. "Do you know who they're talking about?" Ethan closed his eyes. "Yes." Silence thundered on the line. "Come over," Richard said. "Now." Ethan drove through the city with shaking hands. He rehearsed explanations, confessions, apologies. But nothing sounded strong enough to hold what was about to break. In the study, Richard stood by the window, article printed, clenched in his fist. "It was you," Richard said, not asking. "Yes." "How much?" Richard's voice was controlled, dangerous. 47%. The room seemed to shrink. "You let me offer you equity," Richard said slowly. "You watched me." "I never took advantage," Ethan said quickly. "I saved the company. I stepped away. I never interfered with your leadership." Richard turned, eyes blazing. "You lied to my daughter." That word hit harder than any accusation. "I was waiting for the right moment," Ethan said, voice breaking. "I didn't want power to define us." Richard laughed bitterly. Power always defines the silence around it. The door opened behind them. "Dad." Lily's voice trembled. "What's going on?" Ethan turned, blood draining from his face. The secret had finally found its voice. Lily stood frozen in the doorway, her coat still half on, keys clenched in her hand. The air between the 3 of them felt brittle, like glass stretched too thin. "What's secret?" she asked, her voice calm in a way that frightened Ethan more than anger ever could. Richard didn't answer. He couldn't. He simply handed her the printed article with a stiff motion, as if passing over evidence in a courtroom. Lily's eyes scanned the page quickly at first, then slower, brows knitting together. "Silent investor, near controlling interest," she whispered. Her gaze lifted, locking onto Ethan's. "That's not possible." Ethan stepped forward. "Lily." "How much?" she asked, cutting him off. Her voice cracked on the word. Ethan swallowed. 47%. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full of years, of dinners, of shared jokes and unspoken truths collapsing into one moment. You owned almost half of my father's company, Lily said slowly, disbelief sharpening into hurt. Our entire marriage. You never thought to tell me? Ethan's eyes burned. I wanted to. So many times. But I was afraid the moment I said it, you'd never see me the same way again. Richard scoffed. You made a fool of me. No, Ethan said, turning to him. I protected you. I protected her. I never voted against you. I never cashed out. I let you run everything. Lily shook her head, backing away as if the room itself had shifted. You let me talk about honesty. You listened while I said secrets rot relationships from the inside. Each word landed like a quiet blow. I love you, Ethan said, voice barely holding together. That was never a lie. Lily laughed once, sharp and broken. But this was. If that reveal hit you in the chest the way it hit them, leave a red heart below. Some moments are too heavy for words, and even a small symbol can say, I felt that too. Lily left without another word. The door closing behind her echoed louder than any argument could have. Days passed without her coming home. Ethan slept on the couch, staring at the ceiling through sleepless nights, replaying every moment he'd chosen silence over truth. Richard refused his calls. The board postponed decisions. Everything Ethan had carefully balanced was unraveling. On the third night, Ethan found Lily at the literacy center. The lights were low, chairs stacked, the faint smell of old books in the air. She was sitting alone at a small table, hands folded, staring at nothing. I didn't know where else to go, he said quietly from the doorway. She didn't look up. Figures. He approached slowly, like one might approach someone grieving. I never wanted to hurt you. You don't get credit for intention, Lily said softly. Only for truth. Ethan nodded. You're right. Silence again, but different this time. Less explosive. More tired. My whole life, Lily said, finally looking at him, I fought to be seen as more than Richard Hale's daughter. And you, her voice wavered, you turned out to be part of that world I was running from. I left that world, Ethan said. I chose you. But you didn't trust me with who you were. That truth hurt more than her anger. Richard called Lily the next morning. She went alone. Ethan waited. And waited. When Lily returned home that evening, her eyes were red but steady. She sat across from Ethan at the kitchen table, the space between them heavy with everything unsaid. He told me everything, she said. About how you saved the company. About how you refused control. About how you never used your ownership to hurt anyone. Ethan nodded, not daring to hope. He also told me how betrayed he feels, Lily continued. How small it made him feel. I never wanted that, Ethan whispered. I know, Lily said. That's the problem. You always wanted to protect everyone. But you forgot that protection without honesty still wounds. She stood, pacing slowly. Dad doesn't know if he can forgive you. Ethan looked down. I don't blame him. She stopped in front of him. The question is, can I? The word hung there, forgive, fragile and enormous. Be honest. If you were Lily, standing where she stands right now, could you forgive after something like this? Type forgive, if you think you could, or never, if the trust would be too shattered to rebuild. Lily took a deep breath. I asked myself one thing, she said quietly. Who were you when no one was watching? She thought of the intern at the charity event. Of the bakery bread in the hospital. Of the man who never flaunted power, who knelt to help strangers without cameras. You weren't cruel, she said. You weren't greedy. You were afraid. Ethan's eyes filled. I was. That doesn't erase the pain, Lily said. But it explains it. She reached out, resting her hand over his. He didn't move, afraid the moment might vanish. I'm not ready to say everything's okay, she said. But I'm willing to try, if you never hide again. Ethan squeezed her hand, tears finally falling. Never. Outside, the city moved on, unaware that something fragile had just survived the breaking point. But one last reckoning remained, with Richard, with the company, and with a legacy that now demanded not silence, but courage. Richard Hale didn't invite Ethan back to the house. He summoned him to the office. The building stood like a monument of steel and glass against the gray morning, unchanged, indifferent. Ethan walked through the lobby he had once saved from collapse, now feeling like a stranger inside his own shadow. Heads turned. Whispers followed. The article had spread further than anyone admitted. In the boardroom, Richard sat alone at the long table. No lawyers. No assistants. Just a man and the weight of his life's work. "Sit," Richard said. Ethan did. For a long moment, neither spoke. The city hummed faintly through the windows, traffic far below, life continuing without regard for broken pride or wounded trust. "I built this company with my hands," Richard said finally. "Every scar on them means something. And all this time, you were there, owning nearly half, watching me pretend I was still in control." "I never wanted to take it from you," Ethan replied quietly. "I wanted you to succeed." Richard's jaw tightened. "You don't hide truth from someone you respect." "I know," Ethan said. "And I'll carry that failure forever." Richard studied him, searching, not for numbers, but for motive. "Why didn't you ever step in? There were times you could have forced my hand." "Because it wasn't mine to lead," Ethan said. "I believed leadership should belong to the person willing to stand in the light. I chose to stay back." Richard laughed bitterly. "And yet here we are." Ethan took a breath. "I'm transferring my shares into a blind trust. Effective immediately." Richard froze. "What?" "I'll remove myself completely," Ethan continued. "No voting power. No influence. The company remains yours, until you decide otherwise." "You'd give up billions," Richard said slowly, disbelief creeping in, "to make a point?" "To make things right," Ethan said. "With Lily. With you." Silence returned, heavier than before. Richard stood and walked to the window, hands clasped behind his back. "Do you know what hurt the most?" he asked without turning. "Not the money. Not the control. It's realizing my daughter trusted you more than she trusted me, and you broke that trust." Ethan lowered his head. "I'm sorry." Richard turned, eyes tired now instead of furious. "So am I." That evening, Lily joined them, hesitant, guarded. The three sat in the same room where the truth had detonated days earlier, but something had changed. The anger had burned itself out, leaving only the ache. Ethan explained the trust. The conditions. His complete withdrawal. Lily looked at him, stunned. "You don't have to do that." "I do," Ethan said. "Because love without sacrifice is just words." Richard watched his daughter's reaction closely. When he saw the tears she tried to hide, something inside him finally cracked. "You remind me of myself," Richard said to Ethan. "Before ambition taught me fear." Weeks passed. The board stabilized. The trust was enacted. Headlines faded. The company moved forward, still powerful but steadier somehow, less sharp at the edges. At home, Ethan and Lily rebuilt slowly. Conversations stretched late into the night. Pain surfaced, then softened. Trust returned, not as something assumed, but as something earned again, piece by piece. One Sunday morning, they returned together to the literacy center. The same boy from years ago ran up to Ethan, grinning, book clutched proudly. "I can read it now," he said. Ethan knelt, smiling. "I knew you could. If you believe love still finds a way to win, even after it's tested, comment, in. Let's fill this space with hope. Someone reading quietly right now might need to see that healing is still possible." Richard visited the center later that afternoon. He stood quietly watching Lily teach, watching Ethan listen more than he spoke. "You built something better than a company," Richard said at last. "You built a life." Ethan looked at Lily, then back at Richard. "I learned from your mistakes, and my own." Richard nodded once. It wasn't forgiveness spoken aloud, but it was close enough to feel like peace. As the sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the classroom floor, Ethan realized something profound. Power had never been the real inheritance. Integrity was. And in choosing truth over control, he hadn't lost everything. He had finally gained what mattered most. Life didn't snap back into place. It eased. Ethan learned that healing didn't arrive with grand gestures anymore. It came quietly, in mornings without tension, in evenings where silence no longer felt like punishment. Lily still flinched sometimes when conversations drifted toward money or power, but she didn't shut down. She stayed. And that mattered more than certainty. Richard, on the other hand, changed in subtler ways. He stopped working late nights. He left meetings early. He listened more than he spoke. For the first time in decades, the company wasn't his entire identity. It was just something he cared for, not something he clung to. One afternoon, months after everything unraveled, Richard asked Ethan to walk with him. Not to the office. Not to a boardroom. To a quiet public park near the river. They sat on a bench watching people pass. Runners, parents, couples arguing softly and then laughing again. Ordinary life. The kind Richard had spent years ignoring. "I've been thinking," Richard said, "about legacy." Ethan waited. "I always thought legacy was what you leave behind," Richard continued. "Buildings. Numbers. Control." He exhaled slowly. "But I think it's what you leave inside people." Ethan nodded. "That's harder to measure." Richard gave a small smile. "Exactly why I missed it." He turned to Ethan. "I won't pretend I'm fully healed. Pride doesn't dissolve overnight. But I see now that you never wanted to take from me. You wanted to protect what mattered." Ethan's throat tightened. "I wish I'd trusted you enough to tell the truth sooner." "So do I," Richard said. "But wishing doesn't move us forward." They sat in silence, not awkward, reflective. "I'm stepping down completely next year," Richard said at last. "Not because I'm weak. Because I'm ready." Ethan looked at him, surprised. "And the company?" Richard chuckled. "It'll survive without my grip around its throat." The pause. "I want Lily involved," Richard added. "Not as an obligation. As a choice." Ethan smiled faintly. "She'd like that." At home, Lily listened quietly as Ethan told her about the conversation. She leaned against the counter, arms folded, absorbing it all. "He's trying," she said. "Yes," Ethan replied. "In his way." Lily nodded. "Then maybe I can too." Weeks later, Lily accepted a part-time advisory role, focused on education and community outreach. No executive titles. No spotlight. Just impact. The literacy center expanded. Donations came in, some from Ethan's trust, quietly, anonymously. The children didn't know his name. They only knew the doors stayed open. One evening, as Lily locked up the center, she turned to Ethan. "You know," she said, "if you'd told me everything at the beginning, I might not have married you." Ethan smiled sadly. "I know. But," she continued, taking his hand, "I also know the man I married. Not the numbers. Not the secret. The man who stayed small on purpose." They walked home together under streetlights that hummed softly, the city no longer looming, just living. Months turned into a year. Richard officially retired. The announcement made headlines. Analysts speculated. No one mentioned Ethan. And that was exactly how he wanted it. On the night of the retirement dinner, Richard raised a glass, not to profits or dominance, but to family. To second chances, he said, eyes lingering on Ethan and Lily. And to the courage it takes to choose people over power. Ethan felt Lily squeeze his hand. Later, as guests filtered out and the music softened, Lily rested her head against Ethan's shoulder. "Do you regret it?" she asked quietly. "Giving it all up?" Ethan looked around the room, at Richard laughing softly with old friends, at the warmth instead of tension, at Lily's calm presence beside him. "No," he said without hesitation. "I think I finally invested in the right thing." The world outside kept chasing more money, more status, more control. But inside that quiet moment, Ethan understood something rare. Sometimes the greatest wealth is walking away. And still being whole. The night after Richard's retirement dinner, the city felt unusually quiet. Not silent, just softer, like it was finally listening instead of shouting. Ethan and Lily didn't go straight home. They walked. No destination. Just side by side, hands brushing, steps unhurried. You know what scares me? Lily said after a while. Ethan glanced at her. What? That things are good, she admitted. And part of me keeps waiting for the ground to shake again. Ethan nodded. I feel that too. They stopped at a small bridge overlooking the river. Water slid beneath them, dark and steady, reflecting broken pieces of light that somehow still looked whole. I spent so long believing security came from control, Ethan said. From having leverage no one could take away. He paused. But the moment I gave it up, I finally slept. Lily leaned against the railing. I used to think love meant transparency from the start. No shadows. No fear. She smiled faintly. Now I think love is what survives after the shadows are exposed. Ethan looked at her, really looked, at the calm in her face that had replaced the sharp edge of hurt. Thank you, he said. For what? For staying when it would have been easier to leave. She met his eyes. Thank you for choosing truth when it finally mattered. The months that followed weren't dramatic, and that, in itself, felt like a miracle. They hosted quiet dinners, laughed more easily, argued sometimes, but without the old undercurrent of fear. Ethan returned to teaching part-time, standing in classrooms where no one cared about net worth, only whether he showed up. One afternoon, a student asked him, "Sir, why don't you work in business? You're really good with numbers." Ethan smiled. Because I'm better with people. At the literacy center, Lily watched confidence bloom in children who once hid behind silence. She started writing again. Short reflections about kindness, about power, about how easily love fractures when truth is delayed. She never mentioned names. She didn't need to. Richard visited less often, but when he did, it wasn't heavy. He brought fruit. Asked about classes. Listened when Lily spoke, really listened, as if trying to relearn her from the beginning. One afternoon, as he prepared to leave, Richard stopped at the door and turned to Ethan. I spent years teaching the world how to build, he said. You taught me how to let go. Ethan felt something settle inside him then, a final piece finding its place. That evening, Lily found Ethan in the kitchen, staring out the window again. Not anxious this time. Just thoughtful. You okay? She asked. He nodded. I was just thinking about the man I used to be. And? She prompted. He was afraid of losing everything, Ethan said. Turns out, he was just afraid of being seen. Lily wrapped her arms around him from behind. You're seen now. Outside, the city lights flickered on, one by one. Not dazzling. Not demanding. Just present. And for the first time in a long while, Ethan didn't feel like he was standing at the edge of something fragile. He felt like he was finally standing inside his life, steady, imperfect, and real. The morning sunlight slipped quietly through the curtains, resting on the floor like it had nowhere else to be. Ethan woke before Lily, listening to the slow rhythm of her breathing beside him. There was no weight on his chest this time. No secret waiting to be managed. Just presence. He made coffee and stood by the window, watching the city wake up, buses sighing to a stop, a woman jogging with her dog, a man unlocking a small bookstore on the corner. Ordinary scenes. Honest ones. Lily joined him, wrapping a sweater around herself. You're up early, she said. I didn't want to miss the quiet, Ethan replied. She leaned into him. Funny how we chased noise for so long. Later that day, they visited the literacy center one last time before it closed for renovation. New classrooms. More books. More children coming through doors that once barely stayed open. A small plaque had been mounted near the entrance. It didn't name Ethan. It didn't name Richard either. It simply read, Built by those who chose kindness when no one was watching. Ethan stood there longer than he expected. Richard arrived in the afternoon, slower now, a cane in his hand. He didn't speak much. He didn't need to. When he looked at Ethan, there was no resentment left, only something close to respect. I used to believe strength was holding on, Richard said quietly. Now I see it's knowing when to loosen your grip. Ethan nodded. I learned that from you, even before we understood each other. They shared a brief, wordless understanding, Two men who had stood on opposite sides of the same truth, finally meeting in the middle. That evening, Ethan and Lily returned home, tired but light. They sat on the floor, backs against the couch, the room dim except for a single lamp. "Do you think people ever really change?" Lily asked softly. Ethan thought for a moment. "I think they remember who they were before fear taught them to hide." She smiled, resting her head on his shoulder. "If this story moved you, even a little, don't scroll past quietly. Tap like, not for me, but for the soul who carried a heavy truth and still chose kindness over control." One simple click can be your way of saying, "I felt this, and it mattered." Outside, the city continued its endless motion, chasing success, status, certainty. But inside that small living room, something far more rare existed. A man who learned that love doesn't demand perfection, only honesty. A woman who discovered that forgiveness isn't forgetting, but choosing to stay open. And a family that finally understood that wealth isn't what you own. It's what you're willing to give up so others can breathe easier. Ethan once hid 47% of $1 billion empire. What he gained by letting it go was something no balance sheet could ever measure. And in the end, that was the only profit that truly lasted.